in and crank it up for another electrifying episode of Yer A Rockstar. This isn't just any podcast. It's the ultimate jam session where leadership meets a solid backbeat and business acumen meets bass lines. Your host, David Stu Green. Yep, the same Stu who's thumping bass guitar solos after shredding corporate strategies in healthcare and hospitality for years. Today, hang tight as Stu dives into the world of those rare breeds. Leaders who not only command the boardroom, but also command the stage. We're talking CEOs with Stratocasters, managers with mics, and execs who can execute a power chord as smoothly as a business plan. Get ready to be inspired, rock out, and maybe even laugh as we spin tales of leadership and riff on the music that moves us. Let's rock this joint.
Welcome to Yer A Rockstar podcast, where we talk to leaders who are not only crushing it in the business world, but they are also showing their way around a guitar solo, a microphone, or maybe even a rehearsal jam. I'm David Green, and today's guest is this kind of guy who's building tech, leading in the innovation, and still finds time to rock out. Please welcome Parker Sipes, CTO and President of Annihilare Medical Systems. Parker, thank you for joining us.
David, thanks for having me. Thanks for thinking of me, and I look forward to this conversation.
Cool. Well, let's start out with just a little quick intro. Tell me a little bit about your role at Annihilare.
Well, I do a lot. As you mentioned, CTO and president, and we kind of lay that out on purpose, primarily just because that's what I like to focus on is the tech side of things. My role is regulatory compliance, product development, engineering. I oversee a lot of the designs as far as, the direction of where things are going. And then once we implement a new design or a plan, at least, we put it into action and then sort of monitor and oversee how that goes. A lot of research and development too. So
Wow.
that's where I like to hang out is in the lab, so to speak.
That's cool. Yeah. All right. Well, you've been in leadership now for over a decade. How would you describe your leadership style in just a few sentences?
A few sentences. That's tough because I always like to over communicate, and I would say that's
Well,
that's probably
take as many sentences as you want.
well, I mean that I like to over communicate, and that's probably one of my leadership styles, possibly to a fault. Now, if we talk about negotiations and things like that, I know how to play chess, where I under communicate on purpose. But when we're leading teams, or my leadership style is, I want people to know what's in here because sometimes I think a mistake people make from a leadership perspective is that if I say the color blue, I could be thinking of a different shade of blue than you're thinking of, and I want to make sure that I over communicate that in a manner that you know the exact tone and shade and hue of the color blue that I'm thinking of so that we're all on the same page. And then I pair that with a systems approach because I know that, nothing exists in a vacuum, nothing exists in a silo. So I try to at least understand everything from a fundamental perspective and then build my way back up to the larger system and then see it both up and down. And then, so I try to apply that. I don't like to just assume that I know what's going on in all situations. I like to actually understand it on a granular level. So
Yeah.
that's always my take on things is a lot of leaders and a lot of them can get away with it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but my particular style is I don't like taking things for granted and I like to demystify every situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One common issue in the world out there in the business world is we as leaders sometimes don't do a good job listening. So it helps when you've got someone that's over communicating. All right. Well, tell me a little bit about maybe a leadership lesson that maybe you learned the hard way over the years. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think, one of the things that what I just said, when I mentioned that over communication and over analyzing to a fault, where when you're a leader, you have to sort of know when to switch that off. And one of the lessons that I still work on every single day is the transition from working in your business and working in your role versus working on your business. And I got that idea from a book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. It's a great book if those who haven't read it. It's a way to reframe your thoughts if you want to grow the systems that you're responsible for, whether you're an entrepreneur running a business or you're in a larger company and you're trying to expand that program. working in your business, you're so inundated in the minutia,
Yeah.
of all of the nonsense, all of the stuff that you have to deal with in a daily basis or on a daily basis. And that's, transitioning from that to actually focusing on the strategic value of the direction of where the company or business should go. Um, that's the biggest lesson that I've learned that I'm still working on honing to be able to make sure that from a leadership perspective, I'm moving the needle in the right direction.
Hmm. Cool. Well, that definitely hits home. I understand exactly what you mean. So you mentioned one of the books there. Is there any other go-to books or ideals that really kind of shape your mindset as a leader?
Well, I mean, there are a couple books. One I'm going through right now is Thinking Fast and Slow. That's a great book if you want to look that up. It's Let's see, I'm trying to think of a good lesson out of that. And one of the primary themes out of that book is you have two different systems of thinking. You have your system one thinking, and then you have your system two thinking. And system one is more of like a heuristic sort of, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. And you gain that over experience in a crystallized mindset. Whereas systems two is like the slow thinking, where, okay, let's pause, let's take a moment, let's actually look at the data because even though it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it might not actually be a duck. And we should probably analyze this a little bit deeper to where we can make a better decision. There's that one. And then that's just, kind of where I am in the book.
Yeah.
But Zero to One by Peter Thiel is a great one, because a lot of people can go to business school and they can, take a company from one to a number, right? They can scale. But it's really hard to take a business from zero, nothing to one. And there are a lot of leadership lessons, painful leadership lessons from going from nothing binary to something binary, right?
Yeah.
So those are two books that I really resonate with. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, I do heavily, from a leadership perspective, rely on scripture a lot because I think there's a lot of valuable, timeless lessons in that.
Yeah.
Um, but those are ever changing. It's ever evolving, right? You could be going through a particular chapter in your mind or a particular chapter in your life, and um, the scripture value is going to be changing
Yeah.
with how it applies.
Totally agree. So Parker, what advice would you give like new leaders that are just starting out?
Well, that's always hard because everyone's got their different styles, right? So,
Yeah.
I can't speak for every personality type. But just a general bit of advice that I could offer is to remain, true to who you are. Understand who you are as a personality, as what your skills are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and just be honest and self-aware.
Yeah.
But in doing that, stay true to the fundamentals. I think a lot of people try to skip the fundamentals and the first principles of anything, right? If you're in your business, you want to skip, the paying the dues step, right? And if you're a young leader, you still have a lot to learn. I mean, everybody still has a lot to learn. You learn new lessons every day. And what I say now, 6 months from now, I'm going to look back and say that was really silly.
Yeah.
And then 6 months from then, I'm going to say that was pretty silly for me to think that that was really silly, right? It's a
Yeah.
constant evolution.
Yeah.
So, stay true to who you are. Don't skip the fundamentals. Understand that there's always a due paying process. And I think just being a humble person, realizing that everybody's flawed, everybody's got, their issues, and everyone has a personality type that requires a little bit of grace, right?
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. And you talk about the different things that go on. I think another key thing is being able to adapt to the situation or being able to pivot, right away if necessary. So, um, what about like, have you ever had a moment where you saw your leadership really make an impact on someone that you've led or impact on others?
Yeah, that's hard. It's funny how it's interesting how your questions are segueing from one to another. It's hard to say because to dictate or to assume that I've provided any impact is a little, that's I want to let someone so someone would be better suited to answer that question for me. The level of impact. I do get the opportunity and the privilege to mentor engineers at a university in addition to my Annihilare role. And I see a lot of value in that because I see a lot of gung-ho, really intellectually uh, talented folks coming through this program,
Yeah,
but they have no life lessons as far as, at least in the industry. They're very green, and I get to mentor them. So hopefully the impact there is positive, so that they go into the workforce with managed expectations, because I think that's important. And going back to your previous question, another bit of advice that could sort of parlay back into this one would be, I think life in general is a series of managed expectations, both managing other people's through good communication, as well as managing your own, so that you don't have, a false sense of security in one area, or easily let down whenever something doesn't go your way. So the impact that I see is probably just arming some folks with the skills that they need to go into the next chapter of their life, whether I'm involved in it or not.
cool. All right. Well, good stuff on leadership. All right, let's switch gears now, have a little bit more fun, talk about music. Now, this is what I call a transformation. Same rock star energy, just a little more R&D and a little less MTV. Looks like you were really into your music back then, just like you're into your role at Annihilare right now.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny, if I didn't have my grandpa's hairline, I'd probably still have long hair. And I say that a lot, and it's kind of sort of become a classic, sort of maybe even a cliche thing that I say all the time. My wife would probably just sort of roll her eyes if she heard that one more time.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's true. So
yeah.
music was probably 90% of my life back then, and 10% career orientation, and now it's sort of flip-flopped.
Well, back then, what was the role that music played in your life?
Well, I mean, you can go back to, I give a lot of credit to my mom, letting me listen to good music, Foreigner and Van Halen, and a lot of good 70s, 80s timeless music. But I was a 90s kid. I grew up in, the Disney music theater era too. So really big into that, Les Mis and all sorts of like, cool musical theater things and plays growing up. So I really robust.
Yeah.
But you could look at my CD collection, and it would be everything from, Ronnie James Dio to Frank Sinatra, so
Yeah.
it's just it's a very, yeah, very wide, very diverse, very broad set of music. But at the end of the day, I tend to gravitate more towards 70s and 80s rock.
Yeah. So would you say that's your favorite kind of music to perform or play or just to listen to?
Yeah, well, now it's more, the occasional YouTube video, as I mentioned, the 90-10 split, right? So the occasional YouTube video just to keep the rust off, I was performing a lot back then, and I would say, that was I guess my primary enjoyment was doing the 80s rock stuff. And then doing studio work, and being able to enjoy other people's music in different styles.
Yeah.
And I met my wife in a church setting. I was a worship leader, for a church campus, and she was a worship leader at another church campus, and we would meet and do our little planning sessions and all that. So
Yeah.
a broad, I say a set of categories of music, and it's really sort of created like just a general interest overall.
Oh, cool. Did she play music also or?
Yeah, guitar and singing,
Oh,
and
wow.
she has a beautiful voice.
Nice. So I did a little research obviously before the show here and I think you play several different types of instruments, right? What all do you play?
Yeah, I mean, I dabble in all of them. I mean, I will say it that way. I mean, guitar, piano, bass. My primary thing that I enjoy doing the most, I would feel like if I had to say I had a talent to it, or proclivity to be able to do it well, would be singing.
Okay.
There are guys out there that I played with, that have dedicated their life to music and still do it to this day.
Yeah.
They didn't have that 90-10 split. It was 100% or nothing, and those guys are the folks that I truly respect from that regard. But yeah, I mean, I like to say this all the time, just because I can play the piano, that doesn't make me a pianist, right? So those who dedicate their life to a particular instrument or a particular craft, I always give them the utmost respect. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, studying the theory and number system and all of that kind of stuff, it's just a bigger string, and I'm not going to go out and play a Paul Gilbert solo or, or an Eddie Van Halen solo, but, I can keep up with some of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm a musician too, obviously, and the a lot of times, parents or whatever will say, my kid, I want to get them into music. What should they learn? Should they learn guitar? But I always tell them, learn the piano first. That's the fundamentals of everything, learning the scales and all that stuff. So it's funny you mentioned that about the piano.
I give the same advice too because stringed instruments are always very tough because not
Yeah.
only do you have the theory behind it that you've got to kind of learn the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and the major scales and all that, but this the
Yeah.
physical nature of the pain in your hands and your wrist
Yeah.
and the syncing your right hand with your left hand with a piano, you press that white or black key, it's going to make a sound, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. So what's your favorite piece of gear you have or favorite guitar?
uh I would say it'd be a toss up. I mean, my late grandpa, he died in 2014, but he was in the Navy. He was all over the world. He had a career Navy experience and was a retired chief. And he had a 1958 Martin that he bought
Oh,
brand new, and he gave that. Or I inherited that. It's all original. It's never been refinished. It's in the original case, and so I hold it just because of the sentimental value. I'd say
yeah.
that's probably my favorite in general. It's funny. I'll get it out from time to time, and it stays in tune. There's not a whole lot of work that has to be done to it. So there's a lot of value in that one. I would
Yeah.
say I did buy the guitar that I used the most when I would play and sing is a 12 string Yari 12 string. So you've heard of the Yari Alvarez guitars?
Hmm.
Yeah. So this one was a Yari that was purchased as it was a studio guitar or a backup traveling guitar of one of my favorite musicians who, just blows me out of the water for just musicality and composition. But if I'd aspired to be a songwriter, it would be like this guy. And have you ever heard of Kip Winger from the band Winger?
Yeah.
It's funny that band from the Beavis and Butthead show, which I was never really a fan of. They kind of threw a lot of shade on the band Winger, but from a musicality perspective, those guys they got caught up in the bubblegum '80s of the late '80s,
Yeah.
which transitioned into the grunge music. But man, if you just listen into their Pull album or anything, in the '90s to today and then Kip's ability to do the classical music composure stuff. It's it's totally a different animal than just the jump kicks and the big hair with the hairspray.
Yeah. Well, tell me about a favorite gig story that you could share. 'Cause I know you played in a lot of different bands and some very impressive bands, I would say, looking at your resume.
Yeah, it's been so far removed. I don't like I feel it feels odd talking about it. I played in a lot of interesting groups. One in particular, I was on the Letters of the Labyrinth album 2015 Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I was in that group for a little while, and that was probably I would say from a notoriety perspective, probably my
Yeah.
biggest gig. Um, I played and opened with a lot of bands, primarily in that 70s and 80s category, because they were playing arenas back in the day, but now they do a lot of the club circuits, and uh, we would be plugged in with them to where we'd open up for bands like Dokken and LA Guns and the Firehouse and a lot of those groups, and whether it was traveling the East Coast circuit and doing that, but I'll say the funniest story, which I believe I mentioned to you in a previous conversation, was the Phil Lewis version of LA Guns. We ended up having to share green rooms in this one particular club, and part of his rider or their rider was that no one would share the green room. And they ended up, I mean, they weren't even in there. They were in their bus, but all the spread was laid out, the bread and the beer and then the sandwich stuff and all of that. So they were trying to kick us out because, they had it in their rider that we weren't able to do that. And I was trying to be all rock and roll and cool, and I was ticked off that, we couldn't be in the green room right before we were about to go out. So they wanted to boot us to a janitor closet or something. So I ended up making some sandwiches and cracking open the beers and, just having I guess just having my way with their stuff. So it never turned into anything. It's not like we got in any fights. I don't even know if they even knew that it even happened. But in my mind, it was a big deal, right? It was my
Yeah.
version of nailing the furniture on the wall, right?
Yeah.
So
That was
so
your Joe Walsh version. Okay, yeah.
exactly. So I didn't throw any TVs out of any hotel, windows or anything like that. But that was a story that happened, and just if I had to recall some, but between driving up and down Interstate 85 between Atlanta and North Carolina, where in the area that I'm in, 2 o'clock in the morning going from gig to gig, that lifestyle was definitely full of a lot of stories for sure.
Yeah. One last question. So tell us about one of your favorite songs that you've written.
Well, I have an album called Rise Above that I released in 2014. But one of the songs on that album I actually did two versions of. I released one prior to doing sort of like the TSO stuff, just to kind of drum up um, some single notoriety there. It's called "Caught in Your Storm," and if you listen to that, there's actually two versions of that song. One I did in a different key. I did all the music for it, except for the drums. I can't play kit drums to save my life, but I think I can. And then I go to do it, and then I'm like, no, I can't do it. So I recorded that song, had a lot of fun with that. It basically did everything, all the backup vocals, all the guitar solos. And then I ended up re-recording that song in a different key, added a bridge to it, and then played all the rhythm guitar, all the bass to it, did all the vocals, but I ended up having Joe Hoekstra, my buddy Joe Hoekstra from Night Ranger, Whitesnake. And that was through my TSO connection because he plays with them as well. Had him play the guitar solo on that. And let's just say my solo versus his guitar solo. That's when I go back to the I dabble statement, right? Because someone that just spends their whole life doing that in their craft, you
Yeah.
have to give the utmost respect to that. So there are two versions if you want to listen to them. I think they're interesting in their own right. You can see the
Yeah.
differences, hear the differences, but that would probably be my favorite song that I wrote. Uh, Primarily just because it was the first one that I put a ton of effort into and actually released on a larger scale.
Cool. Well, I know what you mean about the being humble or dabble because like I when I used to go see Rush in concert, obviously you can't see him anymore. I would watch Geddy Lee and I'd be like, okay, I'm just gonna put my bass away, and never play it again. So
Yeah, and then you pick it back up and you play that one song really well, and you're like, I'm back at it.
yeah,
The thing about Getty was always interesting that he was singing and playing those intricate lines, but also playing the foot pedals to hit the
exactly.
organ notes and
Yeah,
pads. I don't
exactly.
know. That guy has three brains, man.
Yeah, I don't know how he does it. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, Parker, this has been an absolute blast. You're definitely the definition of a rock star on the microphone, as well as in the lab and as a leader. So, where could people check out your music and learn more about what you do?
Well, they can go to answer the music question. You can just type in my name. Park Sipes is kind of what I went by at the time. PARK SIPES on YouTube. You can find things on Amazon. Just the general threads that you can find in the forums. You probably find a little bit of history on Wikipedia too with the TSO connection. So,
Yeah.
but as far as Annihilare goes, you can go to annihilare.com and you can find out what we do there. You can find me on LinkedIn if you'd like. The only social media that I do these days is LinkedIn for
Yeah.
professional reasons. I try to stay off of the riffraff with all the other stuff. So,
Makes sense. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Parker. I appreciate you joining us. And to our leaders, whether you're leading a team or writing your next verse, remember leadership and creativity go hand in hand. Keep learning, keep playing, and as always, you're a rock star. Thanks, Parker.
thanks, David.
That's a wrap on today's show. And man, did it rock. You've been listening to You're a Rockstar, the podcast where the amps are always cranked to 11, and our guests know how to lead a tune and a team. Huge thanks to our multi-talented leaders for sharing their beats and brains today. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave us a stellar review if you love the show. Catch us next time for more behind-the-scenes stories and face-melting leadership lessons. Until then, keep your playlist loud and your ambitions louder. We're signing off. Stay rockin', stay inspired, and remember, you're all rock stars. Rock on.